So welcome to session 1811, top 10 do's, don'ts of data protection for vSphere. Looking out here in the audience, I can see there's a lot of experts in virtualization, data protection, and probably with net backup, Symantec, net backup, backup exec, cont'd, and everything else. So let's just move on real quick. I have to show you a disclaimer from VMware. This is part of the requirement. So there may be some product features that are currently under development that might not be available at the final version and stuff like that. So just a quick look. I'm not going to talk about the slide here. So today's agenda, we'll be talking about exploring data protection for VMware vSphere. How do we use snapshots, cloning, replication? What are some of the pitfalls? What are some of the advantages, disadvantages? Guest level backups, right? vStorage APIs for data protection, that's VADP. Data protection applications such as Symantec Net Backup, cont'd, Veeam, everything that's been blessed by VMware. And then there's also the VMware VDP. That's the inbuilt data protection that's available. And then we will talk about the VADP transport modes, the do's and don'ts. And we'll go on with the summary. So if there's any question, let's just make this a little bit more interesting. If there's any question anybody wants to bring up, just come up to the speaker over there. There's left and right speakers. Just go up to the microphone, just ask any questions you like. I'm not going to be waiting until the end of the session to just answer questions. So exploring data protection for VMware vSphere, this is what we'll be starting off with. Let's just go through everything on here. So exploring data protection for VMware vSphere, what do we have available? We have vSphere snapshots, right? Cloning and replication. We also have the application native tools, Oracle RMAN, that you can actually do, right? For those database administrators. I'm sure this is one of the things that you most likely like to use as well. And also there's the data protection applications, that's the inbuilt VDP, and there's also VDP Advanced, right? And also the third-party apps such as Veeam, cont'd, Symantec Net Backup, everything else. So quick question, how many of you guys are virtualization experts here? Oh, right, everybody, right? Sure. And the other thing is, who here in the room are actually the backup guys? Show of hands. Now, backup guys, before I came into this session here today, I was like, okay, let me just Google what it means by a backup guy, right? I go out there, I'm Googling. It came up with a lot of information about backup guys. You can look it up and it says, oh, backup guys is like the wingman for a social function. Well, you know what though? I don't want to be associated as or known as the backup guy. We are actually the data protection experts, right? We are actually in the business of doing data protection. We aren't exactly just doing backups. Backups is so simple. You just do a backup, but is that the end of it? It's not, right? There's more to it than just doing backups. So data protection, I wish a lot more of the software application data protection vendors out there actually use the word data protection. And one of the things I did notice is cont'd has actually been touting that instead of just saying backup, it's data protection. That's what we should be known for. We're not just doing backups. It's just a subset of the data protection piece of it, right? So how does vSphere snapshot works? How many of you have actually implemented VDP or VDP Advanced? All right, how many of you have actually looked into the logs and see how the snapshot actually works? Great. So in terms of how the snapshot works, right, if you see from the VDP Advanced logs itself, you can see there's a login to the vCenter. Once it logs in, there is information about the data store that it tries to obtain. It also obtains the information about all the virtual machines within those data stores. And then finally, it discovers what virtual machine that you are attempting to protect, right? From that, it figures out, okay, how big is this virtual machine? It looks at it grabs a base snapshot, if there is one, and it does a snapshot of a current snapshot. So it does a comparison. If you look in the logs, it does a comparison and look at it and say, oh, hey, I have this many change blocks. I'm going to just make sure that I protect these change blocks in my snapshots. Right? That's how snapshot actually works, right? So from the UI perspective, it's so easy. You just say these, you say, well, what am I going to protect? I'm just going to say exchange, select the snapshot, and take snapshot. Right? It's a simple function. Now, my next question is snapshots enough as a data protection? What else are the limitations in terms of the snapshot itself? Now, VMware documentation, if you look at it as well, VMware does not recommend you having too many snapshots for a particular virtual machine, right? The recommendation is about maybe 2 to 3 snapshots, right, for a particular virtual machine. The larger your snapshots, the more snapshots you have, it affects your virtual machine and your EXX host performance, right? So snapshot is great. It gives me a point in time, the changes that have happened, then I can just protect it for that particular virtual machine, right? Then what else does Snapshot actually provide for you? Snapshots also gives you the capability to say, oh, okay, I'm looking at my snapshots. That particular block has changed. I can just do a quick restore of it, right? I can do, that's the quickest way of doing a data protection and disaster recovery first with the snapshot, right? But it's not enough, right? How about cloning? Cloning just creates a duplicate of the virtual machine, right? It has the snapshot technology. It takes the snapshot first, and then it does the cloning. Now, cloning, you can clone it within the data store or to a different data store within the vCenter itself, within the vCenter environment itself. That's great. I can protect it from one data store to another data store. I have that protection. But is cloning enough? It's still not sufficient, right? It gives you, again, a snapshot and a clone of that point in time of that particular system. It does not give you the capability to do additional things, like, for example, if you have Exchange or SQL, there is no log truncation, right? So as a guy who is actually, or gal, who's doing Oracle database, how do you guys feel if I just say, hey, I clone your system Oracle database, I'm protecting it? Do you guys feel secure for the database administrators that's in the room? Is that sufficient for you? The answer is definitely no, right? Because at the end of the day, in case of a disaster recovery that I have to perform, me as the virtualization expert, I will just say, hey, I'm cloning it without any customization. Here's your virtual machine. It's all yours. Now, you as the database administrator or the Oracle database administrator, you'll be like, crap, there are still some steps, additional steps that I have to do. What about my dependencies, right? What about those other virtual machines that I also have to protect related to that particular Oracle database or the SQL SharePoint, the SQL server itself, right? Or in a SharePoint environment, right? There are dependencies that clone operation, if you do not take into consideration, it's not going to provide you the data protection that you need in your data center, right? So again, clone operation, everybody has done this. Everybody who's familiar with VMware, it's very easy if you do it from a command line, from the UI itself. You just say exchange, clone, pretty much you're done. You have that. Now the next thing is vSphere replication. Okay, we take it a step further. We have our clones. Now we can replicate it on-site or off-site, right? SRM, the latest version of SRM, actually gives you the capability to replicate to multiple locations, right? There is no more from one data center to only, there's no more just being tied to source and the target for replication, right? You can replicate it to many sites if you want to with the latest SRM version. So one good thing about it is replication also takes into account Microsoft VSS. There's integration there, right? I can quiesce, I can ensure there's application consistency for most of my Microsoft application servers, right? It's great. I have my data protection. You can even customize your replicated historical points. It's up to 24, right, per virtual machine. And then there's no application agent required. Best of both worlds in some ways for some of us who are actually working in virtualization. But don't forget, there is also another department that also has, that is the application or database administrators. They have their own lingo. They have their own things that they have to do. Like, for example, one of the sessions that I've gone to or talked to some customers when I'm at some customer visits, I'm not an Oracle guy, but I can hear these guys talking about Oracle stuff like file per set, table space. I'm like, huh? It doesn't make sense to me, but it makes sense to you guys as the database administrators, right? So let's just take a look at all these three solutions, right? What does it provide in terms of the data protection and disaster recovery? Do I get point-in-time snapshot with all these three solutions? Yes. Can I get multiple copies? Yes. Do I have VSS application consistency? Hell yes. Right? It's integrated with VSS, Microsoft VSS, so you got that. Now, can I also ensure I have business continuity? Now, business continuity is just a term, a business term saying that in case of a disaster recovery, any database or any application server that I have that I rely on is available continuously so I can continue with my business as usual. I don't have any downtime. Right? Now, vSphere snapshots, cloning, replication. Does it give me application log management? No. Do I have legal hold and e-discovery? Currently, no. There is no integration in that part, right? Can I archive indefinitely? Again, back to the recommendation for VMware for snapshots. 2 to 3 snapshots per virtual machine, and it's not recommended for long retention period, right? So the last one that I have is extended retention. Why do I put a question mark on there? It depends on who you ask, right, in terms of extended retention. Is it a week, 2 weeks, 1 month? Yeah, I can do that with a snapshot. But how about a year? 5 years, 7 years? Can I do that with a snapshot? No, right? So guess what? Data protection guys, i.e. backup guys, we still are needed. This is where our jobs to protect a virtual environment comes in, right? It's not a pretty sight, right? Nobody talks about the backup guy or data protection guy until something needs to be restored. But we exist for a reason, right? There's a particular need for us. There's OSHA, there's all kinds of legal requirements and stuff like that, right? That we have to help fulfill. Corporate policies and stuff, right? So, how do I get more data protection? Before I get to that, for those data protection guys, I just decided to do a little search on IDC and find out about what's the market at for data protection. It's actually about 5.3 billion, 5.6 billion in 2013. Now, it's expected to grow, but it's not in the teens, but guess what? It's still 9.2% growth, and this is based on IDC's own information as a source, right? Who are the key player solutions out there? Well, we have EMC Evermar, we have EMC Networker, VDP, VDPA, right? That's still an EMC Evermar virtualized system. And you have Symantec NetBackup, Backup Exec, and the rest of the other players, Veeam as well, right? Now, who are the pure virtualization players? I guess everybody knows Veeam, right? So guest level backups. How does it actually work? Well, you install a backup agent on the particular machine that you're trying to back up, right? What does that give me? It gives me a warm and fuzzy feeling that this is a tried and true method that I can use as a backup guy that works, right? This technology has been around for many, many years. Right? It's been implemented by so many of these backup data protection vendors that it works. It's a tried and true method. Right? It's similar to backing up physical system as well. So if you have a VDPA, guess what? You can also protect your physical servers as well with 5.5. Right? So we have an idea of what backup applications out there. Pretty much everybody who is in the enterprise space does guest level backups, right? Oh, one more thing also I wanted to point out is in terms of the guest level backup, there are some also gotchas, right? Some people will implement the connections and let me see if I can use, well, I'm not going to use this. They're going to use the connections and forget about that particular connection between the EXX server and the backup server itself. Sometimes they may assume that I can use just a single 1 gig connection, or I can just use the guest network, which is just a simple 1 gig connection, and do the guest level backups that way. Well, it's not a good idea. You can do it, right? But most of these backup data protection applications out there, they've actually have that new feature where they allow you to specify a particular IP address or a NIC, right? So that your backup data just uses that particular NIC. Right? So you're separating your guest network data and your backup data. You can use it using VLANs, right? So what does VDPA provide me, right? VADP provide me. I get full image backup. I can actually do a lot of GLR. Well, GLR is granular level recovery, or GRT, depending on who you ask, right? Symantec will talk about GRTs, right? Granular recovery technology. It also allows you to use change block tracking for more efficient backup and restore, right? Everybody knows that. Everma also has the capability to do backup, CBT with backup, and CBT with restore. An additional vendor out there who also does that is Commvault as well. This is great. It's fun. It improves my performance in terms of restoring my virtual machine. So image level backups. Image level backup, again, is just using VADP, right? It leverages it, no backup agents. You have a backup proxy, you can just offload all your processing for the data, for the backups on it. You have your HotAdd, you have your NBD, NBDSSL, and SAN transport modes, right? So how many of you have actually used SAN? Right? It's great. How many of you actually use HotAdd in most cases? Right? HotAdd. HotAdd is pretty fast. Why? One of the reasons why HotAdd is pretty fast is you can actually have the backup proxies as a virtual machine, right? In addition to that, most of these enterprise backup applications, data protection applications out there, I'm trying to change myself to don't just say backup applications, it's data protection applications out there. They also have that capability, what was I? Yeah, so with HotAdd, they also have the capability to allow you to have the backup proxy server on the media agent or media server, right? So HotAdd improves efficiently gives you a backup copy immediately. You can turn it around very quick. You can use incremental and everything. So it gives you a copy. You can actually schedule another additional copy where you can actually offload it to tape, right? That's one of the good things about HotAdd. So the next thing we want to talk about is data protection applications, VMware, VDP, and then the VDP transport modes, do's, don'ts. Right. Okay. So what do data protection solutions actually provide for us in the virtualized data center? You actually get support for VADP. Everybody has that support, right? You have application data protection support that you can do at the guest image level. So all the database administrators, all the Oracle guys, right? You can manage your own domain. You have control of that. For example, one of the things before I joined my new company is with data domain. Data domain has also implemented a way that you can actually give you the leverage as an as the Oracle administrator to do your own backups. Right? There is also, you can create multiple local or offsite copies, and then you can also do legal hosts and e-discovery, like Veeam Backup Management Suite. They have that Veeam Backup Search server, or even Symantec Net Backup. Right? You have that capability to do additional hosts and search and stuff like that for any legal requirements. In addition to that, you get extended retention period. You can actually you can now actually offsite it, offload it 1 year, 5 years, 7 years, right? Or indefinitely for some of those who have the governmental requirements. So what are the best practices for using VDP if you have the VDP Advanced, right? Use thin provisioning. The reason is that sometimes you have no idea whether that storage that you have already set aside is enough. Right? Thin provisioning allows you to grow. VDP Advanced 5.5 supports thin provisioning, and you can actually grow the volume. So you don't have to continue to add additional storage, but you can just, with thin provisioning, just increase the size of that particular disk. Use static IP address entry for the VDP appliance. If you do not do that, when you get to a point where you're actually doing some test confirmation for VDP Advanced, you might see a failure. So what you have to end up with in the end is that you have to probably redeploy the OVA for the VDP Advanced. So this is something that I kind of run into, and it's like, oh, okay. Now I have to go and redeploy it again. So this is something I learned from my own mistake. Make sure you do the vCenter registration, of course, that's required. Use an FQDN for the DNS server entry, port 53 for the DNS, and then make sure you provision an account with admin privileges for the VDP Advanced. So once you have that all set up, you can see from the VDP appliance itself, all the services are up and running. Okay. So how do you do it for guest level backups for Exchange? Well, VDP Advanced supports that. You can now do just install the agent on the Exchange server. So one of the things also is you must have the network route from VDP Advanced to the Exchange server itself. It has to have that communication. So what I've done in my own test environment is that it's because VDP appliance itself is actually a Linux kernel based, right? You can actually just go in, add additional network connections to that VDP appliance, and then you can get and set up additional VLANs and stuff like that for it. Right? Because by default, when you configure VDP Advanced, you only get one NIC. Then you install the VSS GRR for the Exchange MAPI and CDO kit, right? So this is all based on Avamar, right? VDP Advanced is a virtualized Avamar. And the recommendation, for example, with Exchange is you do not try to group it into the same backup job. Just separate those as two different backup jobs for Exchange. A simple example, how do you do a restore, right? You can restore to original, you can restore using RSG or RDB. RSG is recovery storage group, and RDB is just a recovery database, right? So using an RSG or RDB is actually a good recommendation. If you are in a production environment, you're trying to restore your Exchange, and you're trying to restore your Exchange database into a live production environment, you could end up with some problems, right? So the best way to do it is always try to restore it to using an RSG or RDB, so that you don't what's the word I'm looking for? Well, just say screw up with the live production database. You don't want that to happen, right? You have multiple people depending on you for that, so you don't want that on your head. You could lose your job. Well. So let's get down to VADP transports modes, the do's and don'ts. So how does HotAdd work? Well, we talked about it earlier. It goes through your vCenter, looks at your data stores, look at the virtual machine itself, finds out what particular virtual machine, and then it attaches the snapshot, right, to your backup proxy. And then it does a check between the base and the current, see what are the change blocks, and then it does the backup. The backup itself, right? So here's an example of how it actually attaches to a VDP appliance. You can see this as a non-persistent disk. If you look at it when you're going through your vCenter, when you're doing your backup, just open up a window to that particular VDP advanced appliance and look for the changes when it attaches the particular VMDK. Oh, make sure you use the 10 gig for your storage network. Yes, that's for sure. Yeah, you don't want to be using a single 1 gig LAN for your backups, right? That's not going to fly. Proxy server must be a virtual machine. And a proxy server can also be a backup server. So everybody does that. So here's a quick example. Does anybody know why that occurs? vDisk Live attempt to connect to virtual disk failed. Anybody seen that comment? Yes? Sorry? Yeah? Right. Data store not available, right? Or the EXX host is not available, right? So what do we see? If you look in the VDP appliance log, you can see no route to host. Hang on. Oh, no, yeah, sorry, right. But that's what I'm pointing to in terms of the no route to host itself, yeah. You know what I mean, right? Both HotAdd and NBD also has to have a connection to the host itself, right? So what is this error an indication of? Right, you cannot consolidate. You see that? Sorry? Right, yes. Right, so this is pretty common. There are some times when you're doing your data protection and you lost a connection, or for example, okay, in VMware 5, vSphere 5, right? VMware already makes sure that you cannot vMotion your proxies, your virtual machine when you're doing your backup. It prevents you from doing that. But guess what? It does not prevent you from moving your proxy server from one EXX host to another EXX host. So if you have some sort of automation setup that when you are looking at the resource usage on a particular EXX host, you automatically move your proxy server while the backup is happening, this can occur. So make sure you keep track of that. So a summary of HotAdd transport mode. Make sure you have your proxy host has network access to the EXX server. Everybody knows. Deploy additional proxy server if you need to. Because for each of these media servers or media agents that's not VDPA, each of these SCSI controller that you have can only attach about 15 devices on there, right? So you need to have either more SCSI controllers or more proxy servers to do that. Don't use HotAdd for independent disk. Yeah, everybody should know about that, right? Don't migrate the virtual machines during backups. This is prevented from happening with VMware 5. If you try to do it, it actually pops up an error saying you cannot do that when it's doing a backup. And don't use HotAdd if the block size of VM is less than the VMFS. That doesn't apply if you have a VMFS 5, right? That's not going to be a problem. So the next one is VADP with NBD and NBDSSL transport mode. How does it work? Actually, again, it's a network block device. It's a block device. It's just using a network to do your backups, right? Your proxy server can still be a virtual machine. It can also be a physical system, right? So deployment best practices. Make sure you use 10 gig E for storage and backup network. Separate your data storage guest network and your backup network using VLANs. Make sure your proxy server have access. Again, also it's similar to HotAdd. Make sure it has access to the EXX server host. And proxy server can be a backup server itself. A backup server is a reference to Symantec's net backup product. They call that backup server, but it's still a proxy host anyway. So here's another error. When does this occur? Or when could it occur? Anybody? Okay. It can happen when your NFC connections limit has been, you have attempted to exceed the NFC connection limit. Right? If you have NBD set up when you're doing your backups and you have multiple virtual machines, and you can run into that issue. So how about this real quick? If you look at this particular setup, it's I have a particular virtual machine, DC Exchange 2. I have two VMDKs, VMDK1 and VMDK2. But how come my transport mode is using HotAdd for one and NBD for the other? Why can that occur? Well, if you're using a third-party backup application, you have some of these backup applications out there, they have a check mark that says auto transport mode, allowing the backup application to select that, right? So if you have a proxy server and you are already extended your HotAdd capabilities, the virtual machine that you're attempting to back up that has multiple VMDKs, what those third-party applications are going to do is they will select the next best thing that you can use to do your backups. So if that particular virtual machine is connected to a data store that does not have a 10 gig connection, and you're using the NBD for backups, you might encounter your backup window is not going to be, you're not going to meet your backup window. That could occur, right? So make sure you use then good connection speed for your backup, not just for your guest network. Keep that in mind. Make sure there's network connectivity, port 902. Make sure you do not exceed the NFS connection limits on an EXX server, which is, I believe, is 52. If you don't need NBDSSL over the wire, you don't have to use that. That's extremely slow, right? You have to do the encryption and everything. There's the resources that's utilized. SAN transport mode. Everybody is familiar with that, right? Most data center has fiber, most likely are going to be using that. You have your backup server, which is a physical proxy server. It's attached to a fiber channel attached to traditional LAN storage, and you have your EXX. One thing also to keep in mind, VDP Advanced does not support SAN transport. It's okay, it's no big deal. You have HotAdd, you have NBD, you have NBDSSL, that works. So with SAN, you have to make sure you have fiber channel HBA compatibility based on your HCL matrix, right? You have to check all those stuff. You have to make sure you configure the initiator target zoning correctly. Proxy server should be a physical server. Now, the other thing also in terms of the fiber channel LAN that from the data store being presented to the to the media server or the media agent, it's always best also if you have, for example, an EMC VNX array, you should use the EMC power path so that you can easily identify the worldwide node name for that particular disk, so that you do not end up messing it up on the Windows discovered devices. And I'll show you what I mean by that in the next few slides. So, in short, ensure you have HBA on the proxy server, discover the LANs, set the SAN policy proxy server to online all. Use host-based management software such as the EMC power path. It's good, easy for you to figure out which is worldwide node name for the LANs. If you have multiple LANs not just for the data store LANs, but also for backup storage LANs for your data protection applications, right? So I want to do a quick demo. So let's just say Paul. Paul is the one of the guys I know. Paul is the backup, the data protection administrator for ABC company, and he has backup server 0503 a traditional LAN storage, and then you have your EXX data store, right? I present my the LAN to my data store, and I make sure that my backup server is connected correctly to the SAN, and it also has the access to the data store itself. All right? So now, let's just say I'm the new junior administrator in the data center. Paul has some schedule that's running the backups. All right? He's running all the backups. He's running in the middle of the night, 2 o'clock in the morning. So take a look at this. If you look real quick on the side here, there's the LAN that's being presented, and then there's the touch database. If you do an initialize LAN on your Windows server, the media server or the media agent, you can easily corrupt the LAN data store for your EXX server. Right? So I'm the junior guy coming in to work. Oh crap, it's 2 o'clock in the morning. I don't want to disturb Paul. He has all these things scheduled correctly. I'm just going to try this. Oh, guess what? I'm running out of this space for my backup storage. Oh, this particular LAN I can use. Doesn't seem to be assigned to anybody or to a data. I don't know what's a data store LAN anyway. I'm a junior guy. Click on it. Oh, can I use this LAN? Initialize disk. Boom. There goes your data store. Be careful about that, guys. That can happen. Also make sure that whoever has access to the particular media server has some sort of accountability as well, right? Because if I'm a disgruntled worker that's pissed off at somebody or company or whatever, yeah, I'm going to have some fun with you guys. Click, 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 click. Bye. Well, he screws up his own image, but also screws up the company, right? That can happen. I mean, I've not heard any stories yet, but it's possible. So SAN transport mode pitfalls. Now this is a net backup environment. I'm like, oh crap. I have a corrupted EXX data store, failed backup. What's next? Guess what? If you are the backup guy or data protection guy, you can do a restore, right? It might take a while because you have the entire LAN corrupted because somebody just did an initialize. So in summary, these are the things that you should be aware of in terms of what you should be doing for your different VADP transport modes. SAN, make sure you have the FC HBA ports on the proxy server discovers the data store LANs. Make sure you also use something like EMC power path to discover the virtual the LANs itself, so that you don't. If you have a media server that has fiber channel launch attached for your backup disk, make sure you are able to distinguish the two of those. In my test environment, I've set it up before, and it's not that easy if you look at just the Windows Device Manager. There's no way to figure it out. Right. HotAdd, make sure you have a 10 gig connection between the backup network between the EXX server. In terms of continuing on with your backups, where you have a situation where your VMDKs are still attached to the proxy server, make sure you double check on the proxy server itself to see what has happened. Remove those VMDKs before you continue on with the backup, right? Don'ts for SAN, make sure you do not initialize the data store LANs. Right? It's best to always use a tool that can allow you to distinguish your LANs on your media server or media agents. Right? So in addition to that, for HotAdd, NBD, NBDSSL, don't forget to update your network connections. If you move your proxy server from one EXX host to another EXX host, make sure when you have that vMotion for that particular proxy host, make sure that when it moves to the other EXX server itself, it has that connection to the host and also to the data store so that your backups don't fail. For NBD, NBDSSL, make sure you do not exceed the connection limits for NFC. All right. So we have resources for all the backup applications, data protection applications out there. If you are interested in looking at it or figuring out how it works with VDPA, Veeam, Commvault, or any other things, please take a look at the white papers that's available. In terms of the white papers itself, the best that I can do also is to provide some information in terms of, okay, how do we go about setting it, different NICs to use for the backup, for the communication between the proxy server and your virtual machines when you do your guest level backups. Those are also documented in the document itself. Any questions? Anybody? Okay. Thank you very much.